Okay, so you can see I've got my paints here, so I'm just going to quickly run through these. So cadmium yellow, sap green, cadmium red hue, burnt sienna, cerulean blue, ultramarine, ivory black. So I'm just going to get rid of those. So this is just a quick view of my palette and how I use my palette. I don't generally wash up my colours. I leave them for the next painting. So here you can see your yellow, your red, the dark blue, the light blue, green, and the brown, and obviously the black. So you can see here, I've now mixed up quite a few of the paints to a very pale version of themselves. Now, this brown over here, I've actually added a little bit of the ultramarine to, just a tiny bit, and as you can see, it gives me a grey. So we are going to put all these colours into the background. Once we're ready, we're going to apply this to the background of the paper. So just make sure we have enough water within the paint. But remember, we want these pale, only just there. Now our first step is to wash this paper with water. So as you can see, I'm just soaking my brush and now applying a lot of water. Be generous with this. Okay. So now I'm going to use my round brush. I'm going to start with the yellow first because it's the lightest, and I'm literally going to drop some colours in. Wash the brush, go to the green because it's the next lightest colour. And I'm putting these colours in the vague vicinity that they will be, and then going a bit further. So now for the blue. So these will dry very, very pale in comparison to what they look like in the tubes. Okay, so a little bit of the red now. Although there's not actually red here per se. Then I'm going to take a little bit of the grey. Okay, so if we mix a little tiny bit of the two blues together, we can put that into one corner. Just flick it about. Try not to cover every single space. Let's put a little bit of that down there. And then I'm going to go back to the green again. Keep it thin, keep it really light. Okay, so once I've got this, I'm going to tilt the board. I'm going to start rolling these colours together. Let them run a little bit. Any runs you don't particularly like, take a tissue, tap off. And that's where I'm going to leave that, let that dry, or dry with a hairdryer. This is now dry. Now I've used a hairdryer obviously to dry this, so it takes about 3 minutes or so, but you need to get this back to flat. You'll notice when you put the water on and the paint on, it started to do this, it all cockled. You need to get back to flat. Now for my next step, I'm going to take a very small stiff brush. I'm going to dip it in water and then take the excess off. Now with that, what I want to do is to go back in to this highlighted areas, which are only small, and I want to use that water, clean bit of tissue, and tap them back off. So remember, a little wiggle, tap, and that will bring all of those highlights back out. So remember this. Now, as you can see, I've lowered my camera. I'm just going to work on this first marble here. So first of all, we're going to take some cerulean blue and we're going to add the tiniest amount of black to what effectively will be the overall colour for this marble. Now it looks a little bit dark at the minute, so I'm just going to start putting it in sections. And then I'm going to start dragging it to the places that I need it, so you'll see it just suddenly got lighter there. Go round all the highlights. Try not to stop because your paint will dry and then you'll get brush marks, which is not really what we want. So let your paint run out off your brush. Don't go and reload. So here I'm just moving the paint around a bit more, thinning it out. Just gone over a highlight. Okay, so I'm going to continue with the rest of the ball. So continuing on with the blue-black mix, I'm just thinning it out a little bit more. I feel that this is just a little bit too dark, so I'm just adding extra water to this so we get something a little bit lighter and more transparent. Now the issue with cerulean blue is it doesn't come off. It's one of these pigments that actually stains the paper, so we have to be careful about where we're putting it because we can't lift it, not like other colours. Far better that we build up our colour and to just rush at it. So do this in little layers that are much thinner than the one I've just put on there. Okay, so while that's drying a little bit, I'm going to take a little bit of the dark blue and add a little bit of the black to it. So again, make these transparent. Add lots of water to them so that we can build up on the layers and not completely obliterate everything that we've got here. So I'm keeping this more to the blue at the moment, but that will change. So I'm going round the highlights. That one was wet, so we'll just tap that off. So you'll note that I'm painting quite carefully. I don't want this to run everywhere. Okay, so I'm going to leave that there, let that dry a little bit, and put the base coat in for the centre. So I'm just going to use the cerulean blue, again, water it out. This is a very staining colour. So cerulean blue is the lighter one of the two. Remember, lots of water and put on in thin veils. In fact, it might just be easier to cover all of that and use that as the base colour. Okay, so I'm going to let that dry, but while that is drying, I'm just going to rub a little bit of extra water to lighten this top area, just a little bit. You don't scrub it too much, and then clean tissue, and there you go, a little bit lighter. Repeat a little bit over this side, especially where I've lost my highlight. And again, tap hard with the tissue. Now I'm going to have to let all of that dry so that we can continue adding layers. Now I'm only going to concentrate on this one marble, but you can apply the rest with the same method and continue round without having to wait for them to dry. So my next step is to darken the lower edge. So we're going to darken this down a little bit. So again, using the blue and a black, and again do this in increments. Don't rush to do something very dark, however this may come out dark. Remember, you want really crisp edges, so paint carefully. Make sure you clip the stroke before, so you don't get too many brush strokes in there. So with this colour, I'm also going to put a few of the inclusions that I can see within the glass. So if you blow your photograph up, you should be able to see these. Okay, happy with that. Now I'm going to go back to the brown and blue mix that we made, which was a grey, and I'm going to add some more of the brown in, so it's slightly more to the Air Force blue. In fact, I'm going to move that a little bit more to the brown, so add some extra brown to that. And in between these two lines, I'm going to apply this slightly browner mix, just as a singular line. Make it a little bit wider. I think there's a little bit of that glowing there as well. Okay, so we're going to leave that section, allow that to dry, And while we're waiting for that to dry, I'm going to go back to the cerulean blue, just on its own, make a puddle, slightly stronger blue. Remember, this one stains. And into that I'm going to add the tiniest amount of the sap green, just a tiny amount. So I can see a slight colour shift in here, which is where I'm going to put that. I'm going to put a little bit at the top there, just to catch some light. And I'm just going to take a damp brush, and as you notice, I just tap the edge away, and that will diffuse the hard line. Now, before that dries, I want to go back with some cerulean blue. And try and get a thin, just put my fingers in the bottom of this. Okay, so again, I'm just going to take a damp brush, tap over the top of that just to take the excess back off. And I should have quite a nice blue in there. I'm just going to tidy up the mess that I've just made down the bottom. Okay, so if we go back to our cerulean with the tiniest amount of black in, put some extra cerulean in, and come back to this section. Again, I can see a slight green shift here, so again I'll go back to the cerulean with the slightest touch of green in it and attach it to the wet end of that one that we've just been doing. I can actually see a little bit in there as well of green tinge. And again, back to the cerulean and black mix. Try and get some deeper colour into these bands. And again, I'm just going to tap between the two so that there's no discerning line as such. And I'm just going to finish off the edge of this highlight with that. So I'm putting the slightly darker colour where I can see the changes. So you literally are only painting exactly what you see. try not to deviate. Now that will have to dry off before we can do any more to that middle section. So I'm just going to run a brush over that just to smooth it all out. And that should be enough for that. I'm just going to lift with my little brush that's damp. There's a green line I can see. So I'm just going to lift a thin line out to be able to put that green in. So keep cleaning the brush. Make sure you tap it on a bit of tissue before applying it to the painting. And then tap that painting. And I'm just going to soften that little edge there while I'm here. It makes sense too. And I'm just going to diffuse the top edge as well, just a little bit. Okay, that'll be enough. So I've mixed a little bit of sap green with a tiny bit of the cerulean blue to give me that tiny green line. Now you'll need a very small brush for this part. So again, before you start, just tap and make sure all of that is dry, or this will really run. So I'm using my rigger. A very small brush will do, just to go back and fill in that line. I can see a little bit more green line here, so I can put that in. Now again, back to the cerulean blue. Just on its own, again, make sure there's enough fluid in the paint. Now again, this has a thin blue line, which is probably easier to actually go over the whole area and darken the bits around it that we want. Okay, that line was a little bit too thick, so I'm just going to suck that back off. And with some water, I'm just going to put a little bit of water in there. And if you push the water over all of it, you can pull that back to put the lighter colour in there. Go back again and just tap some extra blue at the top. So we'll have to let that dry off before doing any more to that, which means that we can dilute down our original cerulean blue and black mix, so I add quite a lot of water to it. And again, we're going to use this as the shadow cut. In fact, I'm going to add just a tiny bit more black to that, just to grey it down a bit more. And here I'm going to find the edges of my highlights. So these are the shadows that you can just about see in the glass. Now I'm just going to take off the edge slightly with a damp brush. I feel there should be a little bit of green in there, so again you can pick up a little bit of the green, drop that in while that's wet. So you'll have to really scrutinise the glass part of this. Blow it up, have a really good look at some of the subtle shadows. So the blue that we've been using, cerulean, tiny bit of green, fair amount of water. I think there probably is some green hints within this glass, so it won't hurt to actually tap in a little bit of the green while you're going. Okay, I'm just going to fill that in because there's not actually a highlight there. Okay, so we have a few little, again, little inclusions here. So I'll start with a dark mix of what we've actually been using. As you can see, some of it's run, which is fine, but then I need to just tap out one of the edges, and there you have your inclusion. Slight one there, and there is another one there. So just tap with your brush. Paint is still too wet, then you're going to have to go back when it's dry. Okay, so let's just get this highlight out. Okay, so I'm going to let all of that dry off and then come back and do some more. Our next step here is to actually concentrate on this lower edge underneath this marble. So for this, I'm going to go back to the darker blue, which is your ultramarine, mix it with a touch of black, and again, don't make this too strong. Now, you'll notice around the edges of the shadow, it's very soft, very, very soft. So again, with shadows, you need to build them up slowly so that we can keep those soft edges rather than trying to remove them later. So it makes sense to find the edge of the shadow, apply some water to the areas that you want it. I'm going to do this little section at a time. Drop this in, so it's slightly more to the blue at the moment, but again we have to do this a little stage at a time. So I'm just going to go up to the edge of where the water was. So this is going to act as the darker part of the shadow. Now, I'm going to add some extra black into that same mix, so increase the blackness, as it were, and tap in while this is still wet. So again, I'm not generating hard edges. Tap, tap, tap. Make sure that there is some blue still in there. Nothing worse than having just plain black. Just keep tapping where it's more intense. Now, with the cerulean blue, we know that's going to be our lightest blue that we can possibly get. So I'm going to take a bit of that and we're really going to water that out. So it's really pale. And what I'm going to do is to actually place that around the white area. And as you can see, I've just clipped that and it's run. So I'm just going to remove that. So we're going to do that again. Okay, so the colour you see in this light is not actually possible to get with just a few colours that we've got. We'd have to move to a professional colours for those. So I'm just going to add a little bit of water on the inside of that. And some water to the outside edge of the colour that we've just put on. You can drop a little bit of green in if you want, just to ring the changes, make it more interesting. Now you see here I've got quite a hard edge, so I'm just going to take a damp brush and I'm just going to wiggle that around a little bit just to take some of that off. But remember, cerulean blue in anything will stain, so while that's wet I can drop in a little bit more of that colour, darker one, and then repeat with the water around where we want it. So this time I'm going to take that water all the way to the edge of that shadow. And drop in again. Just by tapping. So as the shadow dissipates as it comes out, you want to just wash your brush off and then start to move this to that edge. So again, you will get a soft edge. We're just going to take a damp brush to the edge of that so it softens it. I'm just going to tap in some extra dark there because I think it is a little bit darker. And the same up here. Just by tapping you'll get a very soft edge. Remember to use clean water when you're doing this. I think that's going to dry just a little bit too light, so you can add some more wherever you think it's necessary. And I'm just going to remove some of those lines that are creeping. Okay, again we're going to have to let that dry before we continue. Now I've dried this with a hairdryer just to speed things up, so I'm going to go back into the centre of this and take some more of that cerulean blue that's been watered out, so I can just put a glaze over where I want it. And again, I'm going to agitate it a little bit just to get that lighter blue in there. So again, you're just using a damp brush, don't use a wet brush. And there you have that. Then we can go back to the original cerulean blue with the tiniest amount of black in it, and we can start to find some of these other details. Now I should have dried this before, just to be able to control that slightly darker patch I'm putting in. However, I'm not really that worried. Because again, you can just tap it back in. So this is plain cerulean. And there's some more there. Okay, so again, I'm just going to tidy up a little bit of this highlight because it's a bit raggedy. And again, this top section needs to be darker than I've got it. I can see again there's another little blemish in there, so I can put that in. And this again, using the cerulean and a little bit more black, I'm going to darken the centerpiece of this down. And just sharpen up those edges a little bit. Again, I take a damp brush and I literally tap where I want to keep the light part of that. I'm going to change to a smaller brush for that line. There's a dark line in there. So use a smaller brush to just get in to there. So now I'm doing the same again, you're leaving a little bit of the blue, the light blue showing. So now I'm going to go back to my small little lift out brush, and again I'm just going to have a tidy up with a damp brush. Take some subtle lights out wherever I see them. So again, there's a bright blue at the bottom of this. I'm going to leave that little highlight there for the minute until they're actually dried. Okay, just spend some time just going around this and just lifting. You're not having to go all the way back to the white of the paper, but if you've had little runs like this, or the blue needs to be slightly lighter where the light's catching it, again, just a damp brush over the top. And a tissue. Okay. So here I'm just softening the line between the two. So again, damp brush, just keep tapping it on tissue before you apply it to the paper. Slight reflection there that I can take out. And tidy up here. Now, I've got a little bit of a catch light here. It's subtle, but it's there. I'm going to take that out. And now I'm going to use some water just to, again, soften this little edge here, because we've obviously got more shadow to go in. And what's left on the brush I'm moving around. So now I'm just going to correct this a little bit. It was a little bit sharper than I've got it. Tap it dry and then readjust the shape that we want. Make sure we get that dry though. So I'm just going to lift a little bit out of that area. And then soften that edge. Some of these edges you won't get rid of completely, but just softening them should be enough. So you don't want to do too much of this rubbing, because you'll see that you'll start to abrade the paper and it'll go bobbly like a jumper. So I've changed to my slightly larger round brush here, and the blue, the lighter blue, and I'm just going to come round where I can see the lighter colour. Like I said, we will not be able to get that exact same colour. We would need to move up to a much more expensive paint to do so. Now, again, while it's wet, I can put in a little bit of green just to ring the changes. And again, slightly soften that edge, but try and keep that white in the middle. So I'm moving the blue through. A few of these other areas. Now you can see where the paint is migrating, we will have to go back and lift some of that. So don't wait too long before you do that, or you will end up with a stained paper. Okay, that should be enough for that. Now into these two here, I'm going to put some more blue. And again, I'm going to migrate that just a little bit under where the shadow is going to be, so we have a little bit of continuity. Remember, soften that edge away. Okay, so you might have noticed, if you'd blown the picture up, that the actual edge of the glass itself is actually darker than this shadow. So we're going to go straight in with some black mixed with a little bit of the ultramarine. So again, it's still to the blue, but this time it's really quite strong. Now you'll need a small brush again and a steady hand. So again, remember, you're just painting exactly what you see. Try not to deviate. And I think I'm going to strengthen that line through there as well. Okay, so I'm going to add a little bit of that really dark colour to that crack at the end. Again, don't overdo. Really fine lines are really important. Okay, so we're going to water out our shadow colour so it's much lighter than it was. And I want to try and join this up to this. I'm going to wash the brush off before I continue, and I'm going to drag the paint to where I want it. So again, this is all wet, and then I can go back, pick up a few little elements and drop in again. Without doing too much damage. Soften that away. And we don't actually have a hard line here either, so it makes sense to soften that as well with some water, because it's going to go into this shadow here. So try not to wait for this to dry. Just get that done as quickly as possible. And because we've still got paint carried on the paintbrush, we can use that to start creating this other shadow. So again, wash the brush off and just soften that inside edge just a little bit, and we can let that dry. And I'm not convinced that this is truly dark enough here. So we can add a little bit. And now we can just finish the outer edge of this. And again, I'm not going to go too far before I actually diffuse that edge, as I don't want to end up with it being really hard and I can't manipulate it. So I may go back a few times with things like the cerulean blue on its own and just pop some extra colour in. I want some colour in some of these catch lights. And I'm going to darken a couple of these areas here to get rid of some of the brush strokes that are appearing. Okay, so let's blend some of those brush strokes out. So again, damp brush and just pull. If you need to remove any, again, stubby brush. And just reshape something if you need to. And again, just tap dry. Now we have a little bit of yellow to put in this lower area, so again, thin out some yellow. I can't see that anywhere else, so I'm going to leave it at that. Okay, so what you've done there is what you need to be doing with all the other marbles.